The legendary F-14 would gain a reputation like no other among Iraqi aviators, as an aircraft that was incredibly hard to contest airspace with. Migs often disengaging once spiked by the AWG-9 in fear of the Phoenixes. On the flip side, coalition strike packages would often request that they fly with F-14s as their fighter escorts. The Tomcats won the air battle for H2 without firing a single missile. One Iraqi Mi-8 Hip was downed in the war, and this is the story of Desert Storm's Tomcats. Let's start the video rolling with the basic overview of what the Tomcats' various roles in the Gulf War were. Firstly, MiG sweeps, or combat air patrols. A MiG sweep would be done by flying slightly ahead of a strike group, searching for and potentially engaging enemy bandits, however not getting tangled up in dogfights. Combat air patrols, or CAPs, were when a flight of fighter aircraft was sent over a combat zone looking to engage any enemy aircraft airborne. Fleet air defense missions would be patrols set up near the fleet, most likely Task Force Zulu in the Persian Gulf, to protect the vessels from any intrusive aircraft. Scud strike support missions would also be flown, helping coalitions search for and destroy Iraqi Scud missile sites hidden away in the desert. Lastly, the operation of recce missions using the TARPS pod, Tactical Airborne Reconnaissance Pod system. This would be placed in the rear centerline weapon station and would feature 3 camera bays with several different cameras in each bay. This pod would allow Tomcats to either conduct mapping, bomb damage assessments or BDAs, and maritime ship surveillance. Firstly, there were 2 variants in theatre, the late A and the A+ or B. The late A featured twin TF-30s, which were prone to compressor stalls. The F-14B was vastly modified, carrying a new ALR-67 threat warning and recognition system, AWG-9 radar fire control system, and most importantly the F-110 GE400 engines, which allowed for 33% more time on station, increased lift and 28,200 pounds of thrust per engine and 60% more range. With this increase in engine power, there will be no need to take off from carriers with the afterburners, making the deck a whole lot less illuminated at night time. Lastly, there will be 2 places from where the Tomcats would be coming from, either in the Persian Gulf as part of Task Force Zulu or in the Red Sea. The fleet in the Persian Gulf would help escort strike packages with the intention of preparing the retaking of Kuwait by coalition ground forces. The Red Sea aircraft would be interdicting deep into Iraq, flying 1 sortie a day and 1 at night, lasting for around 6 hours. Now to the Gulf. Here's a list on your screen showing all the squadrons taking part in Desert Shield and Storm. It is also to be said how no coalition aircraft was shot down when under the protection of the Tomcats, achieving a 100% success rate as an escort. Let's get in on some of the opening night action with VF-74 on the deck of USS Saratoga. On the early hours of the 17th of January 1991, Saratoga launched a strike package on H3 airfield, consisting of Hornets, Prowlers and Intruders. If you want the Hornets or Intruders perspective on this, I recommend watching the Hornet video from 2 minutes onwards. Flying into Iraq ahead of the other aircraft, the F-14s would be doing a MiG sweep. Their target, H3 airfield, was a giant airbase in western Iraq, housing chemical weapons and being the home of many Iraqi fighters, such as the Mirage F1s and MiG-29s, to now the elderly MiG-21s and Su-22s. The Tomcats were soon approaching H3 and picked up several low-flying targets with their AWG-9 radars. They had no permission to fire, as the controlling E2C was transmitting on the wrong frequency. As a result of this, the F-14s did not fire any Phoenixes, and in the end had to turn around as they were about to enter H3's Dangerous Missile Engagement Zone, or MEZ. Now I must hand it to the Iraqi aircraft because they were pretty smart here, as they were using their RWRs which told them that the AWG-9s were not looking at them, meaning to them that the Tomcats were no longer escorting the strike package. 2 MiGs took this opportunity on to attempt to shoot down an aircraft in a strike package, and 2 VF-81 Hornets shot down both MiGs without breaking formation. A true testament to the rising multi-role aircraft role. However, a shame how the Tomcats didn't get any serious action. On the same night, F-14A Plus BU number 161440, piloted by Lieutenant Tim Glazer from VF-103, got pretty close to an Iraqi aircraft MiG kill. This Tomcat's role was to MiG sweep for an A6 package. Taking off with their section leader, they reached the first tanker, a KC-10. The weather was already very awful, and the section leader couldn't refuel safely and reach bingo fuel and had to leave Glaze to press on with the mission. Alone, Glaze would enter Iraq, sweeping for any Iraqi opposition. They soon passed two F-15s on a defensive cap and acknowledged that anything in front of them would be hostiles. Progressing further on, a decision had to be made. Either A, turn left in a westerly heading and circle over H3, or B, turn right and circle over H2. Glaze went left as, based on his RWR readings, no enemy aircraft radar sites or aircraft were up in the vicinity. However, shortly after, a tone sounded in his helmet. A new radar contact had popped up, northwest of their position, 44 miles and climbing. Glazer's Rio dialed this in with the E2C, but didn't sight the enemy's position relative to bullseye, which was H3, but relative to the F-14. So the E2 crew are now looking for targets in a completely different area. The separation between the bandits and the Tomcat reached 20 miles, and Glaze locked him up, firing an AIM-7M at 13 miles, before bringing his jet left. His Rio called out Fox 3 instead of Fox 2. The call out for one of the AIM-54 Phoenixes. The E2 thought they had fired at a long-range target, and made the conclusion that the Tomcats had locked onto and fired upon a different pair of A6s than those in the strike package, 30 miles south of Glaze. Ultimately, he was forced to cancel the lock of the AIM-7. The unknown aircraft was suspected to be either a MiG-25 Foxbat or a MiG-23 ML Flogger G from No. 73 Squadron. Glaze disengaged with a hard left turn, making any counter-attack by the enemy bandit harder. On their way home, they had to dodge a SAM site, which ended up firing 3 SA-6s at the cap. Their mission wasn't over yet, as they had to refuel, but bad weather prevented this, and they had to divert to Al Jalf Air Base in Saudi Arabia, which an A6E had landed at earlier on the same night, after getting hit by a Roland SAM. They refueled and took off, landing back on the Saratoga, where they were greeted by dozens of crew members on deck. They were cheering, as they were under the impression that they had just scored an air-to-air victory for VF-103. However, the E2 guys were saying how they had shot down Lieutenant Wetzel and Zorn's A6 intruder. Because of this suspicion, Glaze and his Rio weren't allowed to fly until further information. Wetzel and Zorn's A6 had been down by a Roland SAM, and they were in the clear, just restricted to fleet caps. So this engagement was shrouded in confusion, and from my point of view, almost became a MiG kill, but rules of engagements are what has to be followed. Next, we move on to the battle for H2 airfield with VF-32 swordsmen. 4 F-14As will be providing cover for a strike package consisting of 8 A6Es, 4 A7s and 3 EA6Bs. When they were approaching H2, their E2 picked up several low-flying groups over the airfield, but were undeclared as enemies due to the rules of engagement, prompting one Tomcat pilot to ask who would be capping over the bad airfield on day one of the war. There were 4 flights of unknown Iraqi fighters, consisting of 3 to 4 aircraft in each flight, and the Tomcats decided to go for the closest group. These aircraft turned out to be Soviet-made MiG-29s, and were trying to hide within the ground clutter, trying to prevent a long-range Phoenix launch at them. However, the Rios just used the PDST mode to lock them up. The Iraqis knew they were being spiked, as they immediately turned away, and the Tomcats moved to spike the other groups, who also soon changed directions and retreated. The lead Tomcat decided to split off their flight of 4, one pair staying with the strike package and the other pair heading off to prevent a counterattack. After bombing H2, the strike package were flying back when 2 MiG-29s that were spiked earlier started following them. The Fulcrums were steadily closing the gap to the strike group, but then 2 F-15s flew over and shot down the MiGs using AIM-7 Sparrows. The strike package returned back to base without any further hitches. Now we get on to the really interesting story of Slate 46, the only F-14 lost to enemy fire during Desert Storm. Piloted by Lieutenant Devon Jones, callsign Boots, and Rio Lawrence Slade, callsign Rats, will be flying near Baghdad and Al Asad Air Base at around 6 AM Baghdad time on a dark, damp and cloudy night. There will be a cloud deck at 20,000 feet. Taking off from the Saratoga in the early hours of the 21st of January 1991 in their VF-103 F-14B. Their mission objective would be HVU cap, or a High Value Unit Combat Air Patrol, where they will be escorting one EA-6B close to Baghdad before he would engage SAM sites with his AGM-88s from 35 to 40,000 feet. After escorting the Prowler through his launch cycle, they both could now return back to the carrier. All seemed fine heading back to the deck when suddenly, Jones and Slade got a radar lock and started trying to evade an inevitable missile, but couldn't have a visual yet as the cloud level was at 20,000 feet, whilst they were at around 36,000. Then suddenly, bursting out of the clouds, an SA-2 SAM started making its way towards Slate 46. The missile was making tiny adjustments towards them, meaning it was tracking. Boots decided to go evasive, pulling up into a turn. However, this lost him some airspeed and made it easier for the missile to hit him. Whilst in a frantic evasive maneuver, he was hit by the SAM, sending the Tomcat into an uncontrollable flat spin. Both crew members ejected safely, but due to the low light and high winds, were separated as the two men drifted back down to Earth. The Prowler crew reported into the E3 that an A6 had been shot down, so now they would think that the A6 and F-14B had been downed, but in reality it was just the F-14B, as the A6 was directed to Al Jalf, that same A6 mentioned earlier when Glaze had to land. As it was a Navy aircraft downed, the Navy were more than willing to send out a search and rescue team into the bad fog. An MH-53J Pavelo takes off at 8:05 AM and arrives at 9:30, responding to the F-14B that crashed at around 6:20. There was heavy fog around the location of the crash site, and the MH-53 flew over an Iraqi observation post, which sent a message back to their command. A few more hours passed before Boots made a second attempt to see if anyone would pick up on his PRC-90 radio, and someone did. At around 12:05 local time, a Sandy 57 A-10 was on a search and rescue mission to locate the two crew members, and Boots guided him to his position, where an A-10 flew over him at a few hundred feet, but had to return for 30 minutes whilst he grabbed some extra fuel, but told the MH-53 where Boots was. The E3 brought in more bad news, as the Iraqis had scrambled two MiG-21s to shoot down the MH-53, which flew into a ravine to try and hide. The MiGs were then chased off by two F-15Cs on a RESCAP, Rescue Combat Air Patrol. Boots and the A-10 had been transmitting on an open radio frequency, so the Iraqis were notified of his position and started homing in on it. They had sent two trucks with infantry and were rapidly closing in on Boots. He was going to get hunted down. Then the radios picked up again and the A-10s were back, telling him to shine his mirror in their direction. The trucks were approaching quickly, now only a mile away. It was a race to see who could get to Boots first. Then suddenly, two A-10s popped out of nowhere at 100 feet and unleashed their 30mm GAU-8s on the small convoy. Everything in that convoy was left in flames. And Boots would be rescued by two MH-53s and would land back at Al Jalf. Boots, or Lieutenant Jones, spent 8 perilous hours on the ground after he crashed. whilst Lieutenant Slade sadly became a prisoner of war for 6 weeks, being released at the war's end. There is still a much more in-depth version of this by Ward Carroll, going into much more detail. I'll leave a link to his video in the description. Let's now have a look at a TARPS mission. Al-Qaim Super Phosphate Plant would have the second most powerful missile engagement zone, second only to Baghdad. The base was crucial to the coalition's defeat of Iraqis' chemical weaponry, and was targeted by B-52s, F-14Es and EF-111s. One F-15E was lost trying to get bombs off on the plant. Someone in the Navy had a great idea on how to get past the 4 SA-3s and 2 SA-2s, which was to use the SLAM missile, launched from a VA-75 A6E and guided to the plant via Walleye data link from an A7. The camera on the SLAM had shown it hitting the target, however they didn't know whether it had exploded or not or done any damage. Therefore, a VF-32 F-14 TARPS mission will be flown over the plant to get all the information as possible on it. The 2 Tomcats would be escorted by 1 Prowler with jammers and harms, with an A7E with 4 harms for seed. The 2 Tomcats met up with the tanker, taking on the fuel required for a single high-speed pass. They would fly through the missile engagement zone in a northeasterly heading, using the jet stream to gain an extra 100 knots. Cruising in at 30,000 feet towards the target, the F-14s did a toboggan maneuver down to 20,000 feet, accelerating past Mach 1, and started to enter the missile engagement zone, when suddenly they looked down and saw a SAM. Its smoke was grey, and was actually shown to be a harm hitting the integrated air defense system of the complex, shutting it down and knocking out all the SAMs, allowing the Tomcats to complete their 1 high-speed pass of the complex and bug out unmolested. They returned to the carrier and the films for the cameras were taken away to the command center and showed that the SLAM attack was successful. Our final mission for this video is the downing of the Iraqi Mi-8 Hip on the 6th of February 1991. 2 F-14As from VF-1 Wolfpack would be taking off on a daytime mission for a cap over Basra. Wichita 103's pilot and Rio would be Lieutenant Stuart Brose, callsign Meats, and Commander Ron McElraft, callsign Bongo. And in Wichita 112, the pilot was Lieutenant Scott Mallon, callsign Ash, and the Rio was Lieutenant Dan Zimberoff, callsign Zimby. They would be taking off from USS Ranger before meeting up with an Air Force KC-135 and begin a refueling cycle before breaking off and heading off to begin a 10-minute cap over Basra, moving out of range of their E2 and into the E3's area of supervision. Suddenly, the E3 operator says, Wolfpack, engage bandits, vector 210 for 36, angles low, nose on. Both Wolfpack Tomcats change course to prepare to engage. 103 finds out that its radar is not operating properly, so gives the lead to 112, who has the working AWG-9 radar. The AWACS E3 gives permission to fire, and Brose wants to record the engagement, telling McElraft that the recorder is switched on. 112 with the working radar can still not get a radar lock, and are frantically trying to when suddenly they see a low-flying helicopter. Braking left in a shallow dive, Brose thinks it's a Mi-24, but it's actually a Mi-8 Hip. He gets in a wide left sweep towards the Mi-8, getting rapidly lower and closer to the deck before heating up a Sidewinder. The missile gives just the right tone and he fires off an AIM-9M at the Mi-8. Splash 1 Mi-8. They get back in their formation and 103 realises their recorder wasn't going. Now we can't see that amazing kill through the HUD footage. What a shame. Overall, there were 10 Tomcat-equipped squadrons deployed to the Gulf, which provided such a high level of competent security and escort for the strike packages. They wouldn't leave their escorting aircraft and proved the Tomcats' capability to contest for airspace and pave the way for attack groups. The Tomcats also checked aircraft after their attacks, For instance, B-52s coming back from their attack on As Salaman airfield, they were checked by F-14s for any trailing Iraqi fighters trying to sneak their way into Kuwait and wreak havoc. Tomcats also could have gotten 2 Mirage F-1EQ kills, but instead were gifted to a Saudi F-15C. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you think this video should be viewed by more people, why not share this with any aviation fans or fans of the F-14? Thank you for watching and have a great day.